Okay, can you hear me, Les?
I can. This is now, right?
Yes, this is now.
We're live. We're not pre-recorded.
Well, we're not live yet. We're still in limbo.
I know. I've got another panel. I couldn't remember which one was first. So this one is first, obviously. So it's interesting. Somebody just posted on a Twitter a reminder of a thing that Neil Gaiman and I did maybe 15 years ago, which was a simple form of will for writers. And I wonder, should I try and type the link into something or other? Or is there some way to put it up?
You can screen share it.
Well, I'll have to find the link.
You can probably put it in the chat
Or the
afterwards,
chat.
too.
Yeah, maybe I can do that.
How you doing, Greg?
Good. How are you, Brian?
I'm great.
Going crazy yet?
No, it's fun. Actually, it hasn't really been all that bad. A lot of busyness, but nothing terrible.
Yeah, it seems most of the stuff is just people's computer glitches.
Basically, yeah. I think that's a lot of it. And some people have the hop and open on their phone and on the laptop, and that causes a huge issue. It's just should be just one device.
Yeah.
Is there a full screen icon on here somewhere? Or
Full screen icon?
yeah, somewhere to change the display, or
I don't
know.
think so. It just depends
like
on how many
Zoom
people
and
are
all
in.
that?
No, it doesn't. I don't think it works like that.
Okay. And chat isn't on yet, right?
Oh yeah, you can put something in chat.
Where is the chat button? I don't see it.
No, it's on the bottom.
You just says just start typing.
See?
I don't have something that says start typing.
Well, on the right hand side, bottom.
Right hand side bottom.
Don't you
Breakout.
have?
Oh, there it is. Okay, I'd
There you
opened
go.
the thing that said breakout session.
Ah, there
Okay.
you go. There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
So we got a couple of minutes. Give people a chance to come into this wonderful. Yeah, I heard you talking earlier, Christy. I heard you say something about the SEC, and I'm like, I know that.
Okay, I think that.
Hello, Anna. And Joe. Getting some people. Cool.
Yeah, I remember, what, was it 2 years ago we did this at the actual event, right? 2019?
Grand Rapids, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a good audience that time.
Yes, we did. There was quite a few.
Bill, thank you.
The guitar library. I know. I'm a little jealous here.
I would show my book panel library, but it's on the side that way. And I don't want to turn the whole computer monitor over. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
I feel like we should be charging for this free session.
Boy.
If we're giving lessons to writers of how to, do well economically, first is don't give away things.
Right. Charge for what you do.
Yes.
Which means don't write for free.
Well, it's an interesting issue about, do you ask, when you get invited to do a speaking gig, do you say, yes, I'd like an honorarium, please?
When I do mine, it's usually in the locale. I don't really ask for any kind of honorarium. It's usually a seminar for a seniors club or something like that, and I'm not going to charge for that.
Yeah, I think it depends if you're gonna, get business out of it some other way. Like, I get paid by our local libraries to come in and do talks sometimes on different subjects, but then there'll be other events where they'll say, we can't pay you for this one. And you know what? I do it for them because they do so much for me in other ways.
Hmm.
Sure.
Like Brian, if you're doing something like that at a senior citizens home, you'll probably get business out of it.
Typically, yes. So I'm nodding to my wife. She's going for a walk. So,
Bye, Sue.
But yeah, you know, that is one of the reasons it's not necessarily compensation up front, but it's compensation through exposure. And then if people are interested enough, like the 25 people on or watching us right now, you know, if this were a live in-person event, they might come up to me afterwards and say, "Hey, can I have your card? I've got a couple of questions." And that's just how, at least I do it. Attorneys have a very different point of view, I would imagine. Les?
No, I do a lot of this kind of talking, and generally, you know, people, yes, they do know if they call me at my office that there's at least a beginning presumption that I'm going to bill for it. But, you know, if I mean, I do a lot of talks at libraries and things like that, and generally libraries, they don't charge. But I've started to at least get firm about, you know, I need to have my travel expenses covered. Much as I love doing talks, you know, somebody wants me to come to North Carolina to do a talk from Los Angeles. It's like, well, okay, I'll take the 2 days off from work, but I at least want you to pay my airfare in a hotel, you know. So
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And when I do financial plans, I would do, obviously you do them for a price. You're not going to work for free. But I would do the plan, and then the money would exchange hands after that. And then I found out that 2/3 of the way through, when they found out what I was going to say, they stopped coming in for the rest of the sessions to fill it out. So now there's a non-refundable deposit on the start. So, and that's just, we're in a business like writing. You need to get paid. You need to be compensated for the work you do.
And then save that money.
And save that money, which leads us into, we're going to start. Thank you, everybody, for showing up at the panel today. Excuse me, my screen gets really cluttered with stuff. This is basic estate and financial planning for writers. My name is Brian Matthews. I'm going to be the moderator for this. Besides being a writer, I am also a certified financial planning professional, have been for over 2 decades. Have my own office, and I have pretty much a good amount of experience with the financial planning part of things. I'm going to have the other 2 panelists introduce themselves. We'll go with Leslie first.
I'm Les Klinger. I am by day a tax and estate planning lawyer in a private practice. That includes, to my delight, a tiny number of writers, not very many. Most writers can't either afford my fees or don't need to pay me. And by night, I'm an editor, annotator, author.
And Mr. Faraday.
Hi, I'm JG Faraday, and I'm kind of on this panel because although I do fiction writing for the last 10 or 15 years, for 10 years before that and continuing to today, I have been making a living as a writer in the nonfiction areas, both in academics and in job search documents, resumes, LinkedIn profiles, things like that. So I have been making a living as a writer since 1999.
Excellent. Excellent. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through various aspects of the planning process and what it means to be an independent writer, which that is actually a panel for tomorrow in a little bit more in depth. And it's going to be broken into 3 different sections. We're calling it the before, the during, and the after. The before you decide to do this, the during you're doing this, and the after you're done with this. So I'm going to start with Greg on the before, more or less before you decide to jump into the independent writing or I'm going to give up my day job. What do you think?
For me, I think there are certain considerations that have to be taken. Writing is a very fickle business, and you can talk to dozens of people in this industry, and they'll probably tell you the same exact thing. You could be a million seller this year, and then 2 years from now, you're not selling a book at all. People that were writing a lot in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, suddenly when the horror boom went down, they weren't selling any books. And because we are independent, we don't have health insurance, life insurance, things like that coming from our companies. We have to get them ourselves and pay for those. We have to pay for mortgages, cars, bills, food, everything. So you need to be prepared to not have income, especially if you're just going from having a job to trying to become a full-time writer. So my first piece of advice is have at least 2 or 3 years of money in the bank so that you can pay all of your bills, including insurance, healthcare, mortgage, everything. Unless you want to live on ramen for the next 6 months, 8 months.
And just to be clear, you said years, not months.
Yes, I said years.
Years. So 2 or 3 years, what we would call in my industry, emergency savings fund. In writing, it's because writing is so sporadic and payment is so sporadic. And every day, the rainy day fund or the emergency fund is if you can't work and you lose your income for a certain amount of time, you're not in that jam. So the first thing would be an emergency savings of about 2 or 3 years worth of bills being mortgage, I would imagine, car payment, utilities, property taxes, and things like that, not just food.
Yeah, definitely food.
Food is
Anything.
ramen.
Look at your day-to-day life now and what you spend over the course of the year, and have that amount times 3 in the bank. Assuming you want to live a reasonably similar lifestyle. Now, if you're willing to cut back, sure, you could go get a smaller apartment. You could sell your car and get a moped. You could, as I said, eat ramen and cut back on there. But you still will need that, because even if you sell a book, you're only getting an advance on that book. And unless you're one of the very, very lucky few, that advance isn't going to be your year's salary. And then royalties, you have to pay back that advance first. So the royalties for that book might not come in for 2, 3, 4 years. You have no idea.
Before you earn out. So say you get a big advance. Say, every one of the people out there are lucky enough to get maybe $200,000 advance. What would, my issue is, and I've dealt with one family that won the lottery and they won $3 million. I'm going a little off tangent here. They were out of money in 2 years. They were out of money in 2 years because they didn't spend within their means. They saw what they had and they didn't plan for months ahead or years ahead.
Yeah, we see that all the time in our business. I've been doing this since 2000. Les, you've been doing it even longer than that. How many people do we know that all of a sudden you see them, they need a Kickstarter to get a mower pulled?
Right. Well, first of all, let's get real about advances. Unfortunately, in not just the horror field, in the mystery genre and others, there's only a few publishers that are paying advances at all. Those are largely the majors, and then sort of some smaller publishers are willing to pay relatively modest advances. So, you got to have realistic expectations about what's going to happen. If you're getting, for example, for an anthology, if you're getting a $5,000 or $10,000 advance you're doing great. From a major publisher, maybe that's a $25,000 advance. If you're doing fiction and you're aiming, and you've already pretty much decided you're going to aim at the small press because that's who's more likely to take you on, you're going to get an advance of nothing. You get no advance from small presses. And so you need to be prepared. I still remember a very early meeting that I went to. I sat at a lunch table, bunch of authors whose work I knew and admired, and every single one of them had a day job. And that's mostly what we talked about at lunch, was how they make their writing work in the context of keeping their day job.
Sure. That was one of the things when I decided to leave my professional career. I was in laboratory management, actually, and start my own business writing, which was at the time preparing academic texts. The first thing I did was, I sat down with my wife and we said, she will have to always keep a real job because that's what's going to pay the health insurance. And at the time, not only that, but that was our initial retirement fund, because me starting out, I had to start, I rolled over everything from my previous job, but you have to start all over with your own personal investments. And in the meantime, should anything happen, she's got the insurance, she has the retirement, she had disability, I didn't. So those are all things you have to take into consideration. It's different if you're married or single too.
Correct. The health insurance is a huge obstacle. Prior to recent developments, health insurance was very expensive. It was hard to afford. You were spending thousands of dollars a month for something with maybe $10,000 deductible, and then a co-insurance up to $20,000, and then the insurance company would pay for it. Now you've got healthcare.gov, which helps out. The HWA now offers group health policy through LSI Solutions, which group health policies are a little bit more robust than individual. Just to talk about the insurance bit for a little bit, there's basically three kinds you've got to look at: is health, disability, and life insurance. You're more likely to get sick than you are to get disabled. So that usually has to be the first one you have to look at. You're more likely to get disabled than you are to die. So the disability insurance payment if you can't work. And then life insurance is actually the last one that people look at in terms of vocation. And we had this discussion, Greg, I remember, about going without life insurance because it was too expensive at the panel in Grand Rapids. And I advocated for, you could get a relatively inexpensive health insurance policy that had maybe a $20,000 deductible, and then the insurance company paid for the rest 100%. And we used the example of a heart attack. You have a heart attack, you have to go in and they find out you have blockages in 4 vessels, so they have to open you up and do all that. That is going to be an expensive surgery. And it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you're done. Now, $20,000 deductible sounds like a lot, and it is. You're on the hook for that. Or you could be on the hook for $400,000.
Right.
And that policy may be as inexpensive as $50 a month. I don't know, because everybody's case is different, so don't take my word as any kind of guidance. But you're trying to shift that risk. You're trying to make sure you're not in the $400,000 hole or the $600,000 hole, and you're capping your risk. And I know another panelist was, if you're 20 and you're healthy, you can afford to take that risk. And in just my gut reaction is not really, because you don't know what's going to happen.
You could be walking across the street and get hit by a car.
Yes, although automobile insurance will help in some of that up to a degree. But yes, you're right. Or you could fall and break both legs or something like that.
You could fall and just break your hands and really not have high medical bills, but now you can't work.
Right. I had a client who was riding his bike. He was in his 50s, pretty healthy. Unfortunately, had a stroke while he was riding the bike and fell over. And unfortunately, the fall killed him. So you don't know what's going to happen. So covering some of that risk is always a good idea. And that goes back to what Greg said, is if your spouse doesn't have health insurance, then you have to look towards it. And now the Horror Writers Association, if you are a member, provides some group coverage, and that's something that you probably should be looking at if you don't have any. So, okay. Anything to add with that, Les?
No, I think that makes what you've said makes good sense. But mainly it's going to be, keep the day job. You need to get pretty far along before that's going to happen. I mean, I've been writing for almost 25 years, and I look back at the gross amount of royalties that I've collected, and I'm astounded. But then every once in a while, I look at my expenses and I say, "Oh yeah." I still remember. I mean, one of my favorite anecdotes is that I got a royalty check, and it was really nice. And I went to my wife and I said, "This is great. This check will pay for the mortgage for 3 months." And I said, "But the bad news is I only get these checks every 6 months. And by the way, it'll only cover the mortgage, no food, no clothing, no utilities, etc." So, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, and
go on, Greg.
I was going to say another thing that you have to take into consideration is where you're located. So, for instance, I'm just outside of New York City. And let's say I sell a book and I beat the odds and I get a really nice advance. Okay. My advance is going to go way further if I live in Iowa than if I live where I live now. And I know writers who have relocated just simply to cut down on their cost of living. But not everybody can do that. So when you're looking into this and you're planning for your future, you also have to take into consideration, where are you going to be located? Like for me, because of family obligations and my wife's job and everything else, we are here for at least another 10 years. We can't leave. So any financial planning we do has to be based on that, not, if I move next year, I can get by on 50% less than what I'm doing now.
Yeah, but that's an unrealistic expectation. So you do have to account for your standard of living where you're at. But the other thing you have to understand is you get that nice advance. It's really cool. And then Uncle Sam starts calling you. You have to pay tax on your writing revenue.
That's right.
Your 1099 for royalties, the minimum is $10. If you make more than $10 in royalties, they got to send you a 1099. So you get this nice $1,000 advance. And depending on the family situation, how much you make in your tax bracket, like here in Michigan, you might be able to be paying 15% in federal taxes and 4.25% in states. You're paying almost 20%. So you're only keeping 80. So now your $1,000 is $800.
That's right.
And all of a sudden that, in Les's example, like 3 months worth of mortgage, it now becomes 2 months worth of mortgage. And then you got to wait that's 4 more months that you're not going to get paid. So if you see what I'm coming at it's surprising how many writers that I've talked to are like, I got to pay tax on this. And it goes on your Schedule C.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I still remember, I'm a tax lawyer, so I tend to think about these things a little more than other people. But when I first signed a contract for the very first book I ever wrote, and I knew that I was going to earn like maybe $1 or $1.50 every copy of the book that was sold, which was great. Except that I knew realistically that the market for the book was that if it was really successful, really, really successful, I was going to sell 500 copies over the next 6 to 10 years. So, there was a certain lack of, I'm going to run out and buy myself even a pizza with this money. There was no advance, of course. So, but this light bulb went off in my head that said, I now get to deduct my expenses because I am a professional writer.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is really I am sorry to say this, but for many writers with day jobs, this is the principal economic benefit of being a writer.
Yeah.
It is that
Yep.
presumably I deduct just about every book that I buy. I deduct travel to conventions. I deduct travel to meetings and conferences and the like. I actually have an office at home, so I can take some expense deductions related to that. And most years, yeah, it's a loss. The writing income is exceeded by the deductions, and I get to use the deductions to offset some of the taxes on my other income. There are some years where I'm shocked and it turns out that there's actually a profit. Not very many of those, but some. But it's really important that you behave in a sensible and responsible way with regard to taxes. Number one, keep your receipts or keep good electronic records about expenses that you're going to claim as deductions. Number two, be reasonable. I had a client who was a songwriter who on her tax return, she reported 100% of her automobile use and her mileage and her gasoline and everything as a business expense deduction. And her position was, hey, I drive around and I get ideas and I turn them into songs. Well, amazingly, the IRS didn't agree. And she did not get to deduct all of that. Somebody asked about businesses that go more than 2 or 3 years without turning a profit, which is a very good question. The answer is it's kind of subjective. I mean, it's not my fault my books don't sell hundreds of thousands of copies. I'm doing the same things pretty much that the people are doing who sell hundreds of thousands of copies of their books. The same kind of marketing efforts and all that. I do it in a serious and I think professional way. And it's not a hobby. I intend to make money from this. I'm not doing this for fun. Nobody would be a writer for fun, would they? Really? It's hard. It's painful. And the marketing efforts are hard and painful. So I have never seen a writer get challenged on the basis of what's called the hobby loss. But it's possible, but I've never seen it happen. But keep records, be reasonable about what you're deducting. Travel, you're only supposed to deduct the business portion of the travel. But keep in mind that you do get to deduct your expenses on Schedule C, as Brian said. We're self-employed. That also means you have to pay self-employment tax, by the way, on the income that you generate. But yes, tax aspects of this may be beneficial.
Yes, and by self-employment tax, those of everybody who's getting a paycheck, you'll notice that there's a FICA deduction, which is 7.6% that you contribute to Social Security, Medicare, and all of that. And your employer contributes the other half. Well, if you're self-employed, guess who the employer is? So now you're 15.2% on top of your federal income tax, on top of your state income tax, unless you live in one of the states like Tennessee and Alaska, whatever, don't have state income tax, Florida. So all of a sudden, that 20 I talked about becomes 35 as you're looking at the tax deduction. So now your $1,000 is 685 or 75 or 85, something like that. So all of a sudden, that money that you have is cut by a third. And now there's all your bills.
That's right. And on the subject of taxes, it behooves us as independent people to be paying those quarterly, not annually.
Yes. Yeah. And a question for Les. About keeping receipts. It's obviously a great idea. How long should they be kept?
6 years.
6 years? IRS can go back as far as that, I think, if they claim fraud, correct?
They just have to have what's called the gross understatement of income. to
Okay.
go back 6 years. Fraud is unlimited.
Oh, is okay. All right. So keeping the receipts for 6 years. Car mileage is, like you said, is always a big thing. You know, I drive to my day job 42 miles a day, which is a lot. I can't write that off because I'm going to my job.
Right.
Once I'm at my job, if I have to go to a client's house, that's a different story.
Right.
Getting to your
Right. So with regard to travel, the key there is to keep a diary. A diary that says, when I say a diary, just a calendar that says, travel to client, so that you can document your mileage.
Right. So, okay, Greg, do you want anything to the taxes issue?
No, I just think for a lot of people, it's hard to get into that mode of thinking and keeping track of all that. One of the first things I did when I started doing this, as a home business, is I created a spreadsheet in Excel, and it calculates. I type in on one page everything I earn by the month, and on another page it calculates what taxes have to be paid that quarter: federal, state, FICA. And I know every 4 months I go onto the IRS and the New York State websites and I pay that amount. And I always overpay by about 10%, which I know some financial people would say not to do. It's better to keep it in the bank. But what we kind of do that on purpose, because if it's in the bank, you're going to spend it. What happens with us is at the end of the year, we get a check back and we go on vacation.
A good rule of thumb, I think, is that for every dollar that comes in that you are not spending on something deductible, and that's an important caveat, you should be putting aside at least a third for taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely. Which kind of segues into just a little bit that I wanted to say. As you're for every dollar that comes in, there's the amount that goes to deduction, the amount that goes to taxes. What do you do with the rest of it? That's where you need to remember to pay yourself a little bit. Now, in the beginning, that should go towards the emergency savings until you get your 2 to 3 years of savings. But after that, there's a couple of vehicles that you can actually reduce your tax burden by putting this money into either an IRA or what's called, if you're really doing well, because you could put up to $7,000 or $6,000 a year or $7,000 if you're over 50. There's another retirement plan called a simplified employee pension plan. And if your writing is doing well, which we all hope that that's what's going to do, you can actually put away 25% of your pay up to $58,000. So you can reduce your tax burden and pay yourself for retirement. So it's first, pay your deductions, second, pay Uncle Sam, third, pay yourself, and then fourth is what you're left with to do what you want.
Now, are those plans taxed when you start taking the money out?
On a traditional IRA, they are. So you could put $7,000 or $6,000 into a traditional IRA if you're 50 or under 50. That's pre-tax money. You can deduct it off your taxes, so you take it away from what you earned, up to what you earned. So if you earned $4,000 in writing last year, for example, you can only put $4,000 into the IRA against it. You can't put $6,000 and make up the $2,000. But you write it off, and then all of a sudden you're not paying any tax, and you've saved for retirement. When you retire later on, you have to pay tax on that money. Uncle Sam's going to want their portion. The other alternative is called a Roth IRA. Now, Roth IRAs, you can put the $4,000 in, but you pay tax on it. Okay. When you retire, however many years later, you don't have to pay tax on that growth. You don't pay tax on the beginning value, and you don't pay tax on the growth. So that's actually kind of neat. The talk I usually have at this point is, if you think taxes are going to go up in the future, then you're probably better off with the Roth IRA. Pay taxes at the lower percentage now and get rid of that tax in the future if you think tax rates are going up. If you think tax rates are going to go down, then you do the traditional IRA, defer the tax now and pay the tax later when you retire. There is no Roth SEP IRA. So if you go that route, if you're actually doing well enough to be able to put away, 25% up to past that $6,000 mark, there's not a Roth SEP. So it's all pre-tax money.
So you get asked all the time, should I form a corporation or an LLC? The answer is really simple. No. There are some writers who have these. You need to see a lawyer to talk about it. There needs to be very specific reasons why you're doing this. And in 99% of the cases, the answer is going to be no. There's no real benefits to having a corporation or an LLC, so long as you continue to conduct yourself in a business-like manner. I mean, that's what having a corporation or LLC sort of forces you to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you can do it without it, and you get all the same tax benefits.
Mm-hmm. Now, just as a reminder to everybody who's watching, there is a Q&A question on the chat. There's a chat poll, attendee Q&A. Feel free to ask questions. We've got one already. I don't want to run too far over this. Just a quick one is Joe Kennedy. When I was consulting, I had separate credit cards for expenses, mostly to get reimbursed. Should writers have separate credit cards for related expenses?
Makes your record keeping a lot simpler.
You keep the records on your credit card statements, and if that's all it's for, it's really easy to keep them contained.
That also, just to interrupt real quick, leads me to something else, which is probably a touchy subject if you're married or have a significant other, is keeping a separate bank account as well. Not only for the purposes of record keeping, but also in case of a lawsuit of some kind. We have, my wife and I, we have joint, but then I keep a separate business account for all of my writing, which for me is the full business. And that is unconnected to everything else. So if anything ever happens, they're separate.
Right. For my business, I have a business checking account because that's what it is. Les, do you want to say something on terms of?
Yeah, this is going to be state dependent. In a community property state, what Greg is doing is useless. It would all be community property anyway. No, I'm not. That wasn't my point. Even for creditors, it's not really helpful for creditors either in a community property state. So,
from, I suppose, an estate planning point of view, and Les can jump in on this, keeping separate individually named bank accounts. If you're sued, like in a car crash, that might have some benefit. But if you died in that car crash and yours is the only name on the bank account, all of a sudden now you have a probate issue. I'm not a big fan of putting kids on bank accounts of parents. Because kids can get sued and all of a sudden the parents' assets are gone. But banks will have what's called a payable on death, a POD, where you can have a beneficiary designation on it. Unless I see you're smiling.
No, I mean, this is good thinking. Again, community property states, there's 11 of them. It's a whole different discussion. But for those of you unfortunate enough to live in one of those benighted states that has the old systems.
Yeah, it's rougher in a community property state. I'm going to pop in with another question. Amy, I heard you cannot be sued if you have an LLC. Is that correct?
Absolutely not.
No.
You can always get sued.
Yep.
You can get sued even with an LLC. Depends on what the nature of the case is as to whether you're going to be able to use the LLC as a defense. If it's something you did yourself, chances are you're going to get named as a defendant anyway. So the LLC is useless. If it's that somebody slipped and fell in your office that's owned by an LLC, that might be different. But generally, what's a writer going to get sued for? A writer's going to get sued for plagiarism, for breach of contract, that advance you took for the book that you never delivered. LLC is not going to really help with those kinds of liabilities. Now, that leads to a different subject, however, which maybe, Brian, you want to say a word about, which is insurance. Liability insurance. Writers.
Yes, liability insurance for writers. Most of us are not going to have offices. So the slip and fall on an LLC, like if you had an LLC and you had an office and you're sitting there writing, you're probably paying rent and all that. But a liability insurance, somebody slips and falls in your home, all of a sudden you are in a major problem. There's something called an umbrella policy that you can include on typically your house and your car insurance. It's for an additional $1 million worth of coverage, and it's cheap. It's like $100 a year, $150 a year, depending on where you're living. And you can add that as a rider onto the policy, and all of a sudden you've got an additional $1 million worth of coverage. Then somebody slips coming up to your door, and okay, they're going to sue you for it, and they see that, okay, you've got house coverage at maybe $1 million, and then you've got this umbrella policy at $1 million. Any attorney, I would imagine, is going to take the settlement from the insurance company rather than argue it out in court. But that gives you that extra umbrella, and it also can cover your car too. So you have the house and the car liability coverage.
And you need to look at whether you have plagiarism coverage. Publishers generally carry it, and authors can get it too. It may not be cheap. It may be already covered under your general liability, under your homeowner's policy if you have one, if the issue comes up. And again, it may be covered under your umbrella coverage. It's something you need to talk to your agent about whether plagiarism is covered, where somebody sues and says, hey, that was my book. You stole.
Yeah, there's all kinds of riders. They call it marine inland riders for some ancient reason. But yeah, talk to your property and casualty insurance agent that's covering your house or your car and ask about it. It's probably not that expensive.
No.
And just give it a look at. Keep asking questions if you want. We're going to move on to we did the before, we did the during. Now we're going to do the after. What happens after you die? You've written 20 books. You have royalties coming in. You have copyrights. What do you do?
So the main message that I want to deliver on this subject is that it's kind of like the subject of estate planning. Does everybody need estate planning? No. Does everybody need to think about estate planning? Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so the questions here are, first of all, think about who's going to be taking over your affairs if you become disabled or die. This might be, we'll call this person your executor, maybe, and maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's kids, maybe it's your best friend. It doesn't matter. The question is, do they know what they're doing? Do they know about the business of being a writer? And is that the right person to make decisions with regard to your stuff? One of the horrible stories for scholars and writers is Sir Richard Francis Burton. When Sir Richard died back in the 19th century, his wife burned all of his papers. She thought what he was writing was disgusting pornography. She wasn't necessarily wrong, but he took great pride in some of his pornography. He was the first to translate the Kama Sutra into English. But she was probably not the person that he should have chosen to be in charge of those decisions. So I encourage writer clients where if you think that you have any sort of legacy meaning just sort of somebody needs to carry on with making decisions about what to publish, what not to publish, what should be burned, what should be turned into the movie of the week, what should be held back from the market, etc. Think about who that ought to be. As I said, maybe it's the same person as your heirs, but maybe it's not. Maybe it ought to be a group of people. A group of people like one of your writing partners or writing friends who knows about your writing and knows what you want. Maybe it's your agent is part of that team. Neil Gaiman and I did some public talking about this a number of years ago, and I've posted, and I'm going to post it again right now, earlier in the chat. But here's a link to a discussion on Neil's webpage that includes a form of a simple estate plan that has what I call a literary trust in it. And I'm not saying, you'll read there, take a look at this. If you're doing your own estate planning, which means writing down something about what happens to your stuff when you die, think about this, look at this, maybe give this to your lawyer, maybe try and do it yourself, but give it some thought.
Now, it didn't show up in the chat, Les, just to let you know.
I'm sorry, I didn't hit enter yet. There it is. Okay.
There you go.
So the other part of good planning is actual planning. And that means not just thinking about the documents, but also thinking about whether the people who will be left to carry on have the information that they're going to need. Kate Mariyama said it very nicely in her little post. She said, leave a clear trail, keep your contracts, put someone who gets it in charge. I've helped a couple of spouses of deceased writers try and sort some of these things out, and it can be a royal mess. Writers who don't keep neat files with copies of their contracts, or even spreadsheets with who they got checks from. Think about whether your family knows how to, even if it's not preserving your legacy, because that sounds kind of lofty, it's just getting the money you're entitled to, and getting some benefits out of what you leave behind, the work that you've already done and plan to leave behind. Some of it may be as simple as simply introducing your family to the right people in your life. This is my agent. This is my best friend who has a lot of the same kinds of things that I do, and can help guide you. If you're a collector, as you can see, I have a book or two here. It's making sure your spouse knows other nutty friends who are collectors who can get your spouse to a dealer who can help dispose of your stuff. So it's think about that ahead of time. Plan ahead. That's the key part of estate planning. Plan. Organize and plan.
Craig?
No, yeah, I mean, I agree totally. That's probably, out of everything we've discussed, the part that I still need to work on. Because, when you're younger, you don't think about that sort of thing. And then the decades go by, and now all of a sudden it's like, I do have to start thinking about some of these things that didn't pertain to me 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Your priorities shift.
Well, and estate planning is not something to be saved up until you're old and gray. Estate planning is always about, we've talked about the car. What if you get hit by that bus tomorrow? Mm-hmm. The plan, I tell clients that unfortunately you're going to end up seeing me, 10 times during your life because we're going to keep redoing your plan. It's always a tentative plan. Tentative meaning, what if something happens right now? Here's what should happen. Here's who should be in charge. 5 years from now, you'll change that plan because your life will be different in some ways. But you should always have a plan for now. By the way, the state of California, or every state, has a plan for you about who gets your stuff if you die. It goes typically to your spouse. In some states, it will go partly to your spouse and partly to your children. And that's the problem. And if you don't have a spouse or children, it'll go to your parents, or if not to your parents, then your brothers and sisters. The problems are, A, you may not like that plan. You may say, I don't want it to go to that brother. So that's a good reason to do estate planning. The other part is anytime there are minors involved, you really ought to have an estate plan in place because otherwise your minor children are going to take control of money when they're 18 years old. And that should make most parents shudder.
Well, then there's also the issue of if they're a minor, you want to have in your estate plan who is going to be their custodian, who's going to watch over them until they become age of majority. And the court may not pick the person you want. And you want to be able to have control over that. You want to be able to say, this is the person I trust, and not rely on a judge who does not know the situation personally to do that. And Les is definitely right. You don't want to give kids money at 18. I had a case where the gentleman died and the daughter got $250,000 intended for college. That's great, but as cash. Well, she ended up chartering a private plane to Las Vegas 3 times in the first year of her college and blew through the money within the year because there's no restrictions on it. And this is getting a little bit probably more esoteric and in terms of a trust, then you can have some controls over when, like my daughter, if something happens to me, doesn't get any of what they call the corpus of the body of the money until she's 40, and she's currently 24. Because I don't trust anybody at that age with any kind of significant amount of money. Now they get to earn, whatever interest is generated, they get that, type of thing. So you can, and trusts are really cool. You could do all kinds of nifty things. I had a client work for GM, and when he passed away, the terms of the trust was everybody comes to the house, the attorney reads the trust, but first the attorney had to go out into the driveway and found out how many drove a GM car. And everybody who drove a GM car ended up with a proportional share, and those who didn't got nothing. You can do some tricky stuff, I'm telling you. But what Les is saying, especially about the documentation, look at all the books that Les has back there. If you're going to create an estate plan, you're going to have to document. You're going to have to fill it out. I've had a lot of people that have gotten trusts, for example, and didn't do anything with it. They kept like all of their investments in their name. They didn't put it into the trust. It's called funding the trust. It didn't do anything. They ended up passing away, and it still went to probate, and they had a trust. So you've got to follow through, and sometimes that follow through, you've got to work at it. It's a big process. Where are we at in time? Oh, we're getting there. Questions? Anybody have a question? You can put it in the chat with big question : write the question, or in the Q&A portion of the chat box. Let's wait and see. So, Greg, those nice guitars behind you.
Yes.
Did you write in your estate plan that I get one of them?
Right now, they're on the insurance plan.
Oh, okay.
Just in case anyone ever decides to sneak into the house. The books and the guitars, I have not decided who they go to yet. I'm thinking of just throwing it out there as a bidding war now, and people can sign up ahead of time.
Okay, we do have a question from Christy. Should we create a trust now? Les.
Yes. I mean, if the answer is, first of all, if you own real estate, the answer is yes, definitely. If you don't own real estate, if you don't own a house or other real estate, then you may be able to get by with just a will and with careful titling of your assets. But in general, a trust is far and away the simplest way to deal with things. California has been the leader in trusts for many, many years. The New Yorkers always said, oh, we don't need them. Our probate system is so simple, we don't need them. New York has come around now too, and people with money have trusts. But I mean, the answer is everybody ought to think about it and maybe meet with a lawyer and talk through what you have and what you want to plan for it and decide. Most lawyers will give you either a free consultation or they'll charge you for an hour to sit down and talk to you about it and help you decide whether you need an estate plan and how to do it. There are some good things online. There's a lot you can do if you really can't afford to see a lawyer, whether it's the NOLO Press, NOLO, NOLO Press, or even LegalZoom, God forbid, they're not terrible. They're a lot better than having nothing in most cases.
Okay, Bill, what should we look for with disability insurance? Can this be a rider on a home policy? I'll take that one. What should you look for in disability insurance? Basically, yes, you should have disability insurance. If you can't work, you need to try and recover your income. For writers, that might be a little bit more tough. Usually it's either own occupation or any occupation. You typically pick own occupation because any occupation could be insurance company decides that you can go flip burgers over at McDonald's. Yeah, you can do that. You don't pay you. Or your own occupation, which can be a little bit more expensive. I can't do my job and only my job, so I need to get paid. One thing that people make the mistake on with a disability insurance premium, and no, it cannot be. I don't believe it could be a rider on your home insurance. You have to get a separate rider, a separate insurance policy. You can deduct your disability insurance premium. You can deduct it against your income tax, and then if you file a claim, the benefit you receive is taxable. All right. Or you don't have to claim it on your income tax. You could just pay it out of pocket. And if you file the claim and you get paid, you don't have to pay tax on the disability insurance revenue. I have disability insurance. I do not deduct it because for me, free money is always better than money that Uncle Sam has to get. Yes, you should have it. No, it's not a rider on a home policy. And again, be very careful about own occupation versus any occupation and whether you deduct or don't deduct the insurance premium.
Let me answer a question that wasn't asked here, by the way, about success, because I wish everybody in this audience great success. There's a tendency to turn to people for advice. Your cousin is a lawyer, your next door neighbor is an accountant, whatever. Writing is a specialized business. And several of my clients are writers who have achieved success, but they live in small towns somewhere in America. And they had been relying on their local people, and their local people, with all respect, just didn't have a clue about the writing business. And so, if you're finding that your accountant or your lawyer doesn't understand what you're talking about, you're not alone. There's very few professionals who have experience representing writers. But it's worth asking somebody else who maybe somebody very successful, who do you use? Who do you work with? Who can you recommend?
It is a specialized profession. And Les is right. You need somebody with that kind of experience, especially in the legal side. Probably most so on the legal side than on the accounting side.
I didn't want to make it sound like too much of a commercial, Brian. So.
No, but it's very true. I mean, accounting is accounting across the board, but tax law changes so often.
Sure, but even on the accounting side, understanding what a writer does and what we spend money on, and therefore what should be deductible, is very special. By the way, I see the same thing with clients who are actors and people like that. They use their mother's accountant, who doesn't have a clue about how to read a royalty statement or whatever. So anyway.
Okay, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to give everybody opportunity to say something. Greg, we're going to let you go first.
Say something about the topic.
Anything. Topic, yeah. Or just how much fun this was, or no, that's about the topic.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we very briefly should cover is the person who, after listening to all of this, still says, I want to go out and quit my job and become a writer. I'm going to follow my dream. I'm going to write the next big American novel, et cetera, et cetera. My advice to that person is be prepared for failure. Failure sucks, but in this business, we all do it sometimes, and you need to be prepared for it. So have a backup plan. even if that backup plan is just knowing that, hey, I can go out and get a 35-hour-a-week job at a restaurant, at a coffee shop, anywhere, something that doesn't require a lot of training, and then you will get your
I
health
like being a
insurance.
writer.
Yes. But then you can at least get your life insurance, health insurance, et cetera, through the company. 'Cause, I mean, I know writers who've been doing this for years. They work at Starbucks. They have a 401k. They have health insurance. Same thing if you're working, I don't think Walmart, but some of the other big box stores do it. You know, find a spot. So even if you just get that job on the side to give you health insurance, and then you can live in mom's basement, you can have that 1-bedroom apartment, you can, you know, eat the ramen noodles, you can do all that, but at least know that if anything ever happens to you, you are covered.
Mm-hmm. Les, any parting words?
Great advice. No, I mean, it's, you know, ask your friends for advice. That's my best advice here. I've got to run. If you want to know more about Robert W. Chambers, however, at 3:00, I'll be moderating a panel on that. That is to say, in 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah, you got to get out of here. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And if you have questions, reach out to me. I'm fine with questions. I'm glad to answer these all day long. Again, thank you for coming by, and we're going to end this here, and we hope you have a good conference. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.